Let's start with the one, we're just going to do this one PowerPoint from unit, or from unit one, and this could the consumer choice and utility maximization. So if you remember, marginal utility, when we say thinking on the margin, we're talking about additional, right? We're talking about what comes next. Okay, so you're really hot. It's a really hot day. You're really thirsty. That first drink of water is incredibly satisfying, and then once you're done with that entire bottle of water, and you get a second one, it gets less and less satisfying, right? And you get to the point where you're waterlogged and you start to feel a little bit sick. So that's the law of diminishing marginal returns, okay? So thinking on the margin, one of the important things here is you need to pay attention to whether the information you're given is total or marginal, okay? You need to be able to, you just need to pay attention to that. So your free response, the free response that I recorded today, they gave you marginal, and they asked like, what's the total utility with 4 units? And you have to add up the marginal utility of all the 4 previous units. On this slide, you're given total, right? So you're given the total utility based on the number of slices of pizza that you're eating. If you eat 4 slices of pizza, your total utility is 23, but the marginal utility of that 4th slice of pizza is 4, right? So it's the additional utility generated by the consumption of that additional slice. So just that 4th slice yielded an additional 4 utils, okay? All right, so if you're trying to figure out what is your what's your utility maximizing point here, if the marginal cost is $2, every slice costs you $2, and this is your marginal utility or your marginal benefit in terms of dollars, then you would definitely eat that first piece because your benefit is $8. You only have to pay 2. You're going to eat the second, the third, the fourth. You're even going to eat the 5th because at the 5th, your additional utility is equal to that additional cost. But you're not going to eat that 6th piece because the additional benefit is now less than the additional cost. So the cost outweighs the benefit now. Okay, so you're going to eat 5 slices. Okay, so this isn't complicated. I just wanted you to see marginal analysis again. I wanted to do one quick little review on that. It's not complicated. It's just a matter of kind of getting back in the swing of thinking about things on the margin. Okay, so right here, same idea. If it's $2 a slice, it's not always going to equal. You're definitely going to eat that 5th one because 3, your benefit is 3, and it only costs you $2, but that 6th one you're not going to eat, right? Okay, so we are good on that stuff, hopefully. So when it comes to spending your money, okay, when it comes to spending your money, and we're going to look at the go-karts and movies example here in a second. If I showed you this information and I said you can take a trip to Maui and it would yield 3,000 utils, or to LA and it would yield 1,000 utils, just looking at this, you'd say, oh, well, I'll go to Maui, right? But once you put a price on it, then it kind of changes the equation a little bit, okay? So if the trip to Maui is going to cost you $3,000 and the trip to LA is only going to cost you $500, your utility per dollar, you'd be better off going to LA because you're getting 2 utils per dollar as opposed to just 1 per dollar with Maui. And this is the decision that you make when you go to a restaurant, right? You don't just look at what you want to eat. You don't just look at the price. You look at the what you believe your enjoyment of the meal per dollar is going to be. You're not going to buy the $60 Kobe beef, most expensive thing on the menu, probably, even though it might be the best. But you're also not going to get, just a side salad for $4. Maybe you are, but it depends, right? It's not just what you want and not just the price, but it's the utility per dollar, which is relevant. Okay, so here we go. We have go-karts and we have movies. The movies cost you $10. The go-karts cost you $5. The column on the left tells you how many times you're going. So how many movies or how many go-karts. And then it gives your marginal utility per movie and your marginal utility per go-kart. So without looking at the price, like if they didn't give you the price, then you'd go see a movie, then you'd go see a movie, then you'd go see a movie again, 30, 20, and 10. But when you put a price to it, then it changes the equation a little bit, right? So when you make that purchasing decision, it doesn't matter the utility and it doesn't matter the price, it matters the utility per dollar, okay? So this next column is going to be important. That's the relevant column. So that first movie yields 30 utils. It costs you $10, which means it yields 3 utils per dollar, right? 3 per dollar. So your marginal utility of the second one is 20. So per dollar, you're getting 2 per dollar, and then 1 per dollar, then 0.5 per dollar. And then with the go-karts, it costs you $5. So the first go-kart yields 10 utils, so that's 2 per dollar, then 1 per dollar, then 0.4, then 0.2. Okay, are we all good with those numbers? So again, you just take the additional utility per dollar. So sometimes they won't give you a column of marginal utility, but they'll give you a column of total utility. And that's not a big deal. It's still the exact same thing. You just have to take that one additional step of switching it from total to marginal, okay? So when you're thinking about how are you going to spend your money if at the bottom it says you have 40 bucks, how are you going to spend that money? Well, you're going to spend that money based on the marginal utility per dollar. So your the first choice is going to be your movie, which yields 3 utils per dollar, which is better than the 2 you'd get from the go-kart. So you spent 10 bucks. The next one is a tie, right? 2 and 2. So you're going to do both of those. You've got the money to do both, so you'll do both. Now you're at 25, so you have $15 left. And then it's another tie, and now you're out of money, right? So you spent $40, 3 movies, 2 go-karts. That is the utility maximizing combination of goods. Cool. So hopefully you guys remember that stuff. And then if it asks for the total utility there, you have to add up all of the marginal utilities for each one, right? So the first one was 30, then 20, then 10. So the total utils from going and seeing the movie is 30, 50, 60, and plus the two go-karts. So you have 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. So 75 is the total utility from the utility maximizing combination. And then on number 2, it says, what's the total utility from 2 movies and 4 go-karts? That would be 20 and 30, so 50, 60, 65, 66, 67, 68. Okay. So this is the ugly mathy way of showing you this. It's the utility maximizing rule. The marginal utility per dollar of good X needs to equal the marginal utility per dollar of good Y. And if this is off, let's say that the additional utility per dollar of the movie is greater than the marginal utility per dollar of the go-kart. That means you need to spend more money on the movie and less on the go-kart. Okay. Okay, so let's look at this. It says the student has 10 bucks, spends it all on pizza and pens. The price of a unit of pizza is $2. The price of pens is $1. The student maximized utility by purchasing which of the following combinations of pizza and pens. So 10 bucks, it already gives you the margin utility, so we don't have to do that. The price of pizza is $2. So if you're looking at marginal utility per dollar, that first slice of pizza is going to yield 10 utils per dollar, right? The margin utility divided by the price. So 10 per dollar, 9 per dollar, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4.5, and 4. And then pens are $1, so that's 8 per dollar, 7 per dollar, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we got it. So if you're looking at spending all $10, where are you going to spend your first dollars? Well, 10 per dollar is better than 8 per dollar, so you're going to spend your first dollars on a pizza. Okay, so that's $2. Your next one, 9 is bigger than 8, so pizza again. Now you spent 4. Then it's a tie, 8 and 8. Now you're at $7. Then pizza's next because 7's bigger than 6, so that now you're at 9. Then this is 6, and so the fifth one would be 6, and you don't, and you have so you'd go 2, 4, 6, $8, $9, $10. So your optimal combination would be 4 pizza and 2 pens. You've spent all your money, and you've maximized your utility there. Okay. It says if this number 21 says if the student buys 2 units of pizza and 2 units of pens, what's the total utility? What a lot of people are going to do is they're going to say, well, 2 pizza, 2 pens, so 18, 7, so 25. That's wrong. Okay. This column isn't giving your total, but your marginal. So 2 units of pizza would be 38. 2 units of pens would be 15. So that'd be 53 utils. Okay. So hopefully all that stuff makes sense. Again, it's just a matter of thinking on the margin. And you are going to have a free response question on that. If you look at those, if you look at the multiple choice and free response that if you look at that link that I'm going to send you when we're done here. Okay. So that's it from Unit 1 Micro. Other than that, it's production possibilities curve, which you should be solid on. and trade and comparative advantage. And again, that's that. So that's the tic-tac-toe board with the X or horizontal line. One of your free response questions from today that I'm going to send out is going to be on trade. So one's on trade and one's on utility maximization. Okay. So we're going to move on to unit 2. So unit 2 micro, the first 2 PowerPoints, the first 2 things that you need to know are macro carryover. So it's just basic supply and demand. So what shifts supply, what shifts demand. But in micro, we go a lot more in depth when it comes to supply and demand. We look at consumer surplus, producer surplus, floors and ceilings with deadweight loss. We look at elasticity of supply, elasticity of demand. We look at cross-price elasticity, income elasticity. So there's just a lot to unpack when it comes to supply and demand. And if we didn't do that today, we'd literally be done and it would take 10 minutes. So I wanted to do unit 2 today as well. I have not yet recorded the answers for the multiple choice and free response for unit 2. I'll do that sometime this weekend, and I'll send you guys a link whenever I have that. And then on Tuesday next week, so we'll just move everything up a day. So on Tuesday next week, we'll start unit 3 micro, and that'll be when we start the product market with perfect competition. Okay. So supply and demand, I'm not going to go back over the basic supply and demand stuff. We're going to jump into elasticity, okay? So remember, elasticity shows how responsive, so price elasticity of demand shows how responsive consumers are to a change in price. Okay, how responsive are we to a change in price? If the price goes up and we don't really change our purchasing that much, that means that we have a relatively inelastic demand. So we are insensitive to a price change. But if the price goes up and we stop buying it altogether, or the price goes up 5% and we buy 50% less, that means that we're really responsive to a price level change. And in that case, it'd be said that the elasticity, that the demand is elastic. Okay, so yeah, so that's what we just said. So a couple things, a good which exhibits inelastic demand. Inelastic demand, the characteristics of goods which exhibit inelastic demand. So we're not sensitive to a price change. This would be something which is a necessity. Obviously, if it's a necessity and the price goes up, we still got to buy it. That's what a necessity means. So if it's a necessity, it's going to be relatively inelastic. If it's a relatively small portion of our income, like if something costs $2 and there's a 100% jump in the price, now it's $4, okay, it's only $4, so we're still going to buy it, right? So if it's a small portion of our income, we're inelastic. If it's a necessity, it's inelastic. If there aren't very many substitutes, so like the price goes up and you can't get something similar, so if it's relatively if there are very few substitutes, it's going to be inelastic as well. And so your examples are gasoline. There aren't alternatives for gasoline, right? And so if at least in the short run, so if you get in your car and the gas tank is empty, you've got to go get gas, and you can't say, wow, it's $3 a gallon, screw that, I'm not getting gas. You don't have another option, right? And it's more of a necessity than some other things because you need it in your car in order to drive. And if you flip that around and you look and you see, wow, gas is like $1.10 a gallon, it's the lowest it's ever been in your lifetime. That doesn't mean you're going to like sit in your driveway and just rev your engine and burn gas just for the heck of it because it's cheap. And so the price goes down and we're not going to buy that much more, right? So we have inelastic demand when it comes to gasoline. Milk is relatively inelastic as well. It's considered kind of a staple. People are going to buy milk to put in their cereal and to drink, and it's relatively inelastic. And by the same token, if the price goes down, you don't have people buying like 15 gallons of milk because it goes bad. Diapers are relatively inelastic. If you've got a little one, you're not going to well, diapers are too expensive. We'll let them run around naked and pee all over the place. That's not going to happen. And if the price goes down, you're not like stocking up on diapers, right? And I'm not going to go out and buy diapers. We don't need any. Chewing gum is inelastic because it's a relatively small portion of your income. Medical care, of course, is inelastic. Generally speaking, if you have a broken arm, you're not going to be like, oh, well, it's way too expensive to fix my broken arm. You're going to go get your broken arm fixed. Voluntary procedures, non-necessary procedures are more elastic, and we're seeing that right now, right? That elective surgeries are kind of going by the wayside right now to free up hospital space. And so elective surgeries are a little more elastic, but generally speaking, the category of medical care is inelastic. Toilet paper is inelastic as well. Okay, so your general characteristics, I already mentioned these, but very few substitutes. It's a necessity rather than a luxury. It's a small portion of your income. This fourth one's important. It's required now rather than later. Required now rather than later. So again, if you're thinking about like an elective surgery, so if I need shoulder surgery, if my shoulder's been bothering me for a couple of years, I don't have to go get the surgery like right now. Okay, like I can wait. And so if I have a heart attack and I've got a blockage in one of my arteries, I need that cleared. I can't say, well, I'm not going to pay 10 grand for that. I'm just going to wait. I will literally die. And so if it's required now, it's more inelastic than if you have the luxury of waiting. And then it has an elasticity coefficient less than 1. So if you remember queens over peasants, or however you want to remember it, is the change in quantity, the percent change in quantity over the percent change in price. So like if you look at these numbers, if the change in price is 20%, and after a 20% increase in price, we buy 5% less, that has a coefficient of 1 over 4 or 0.25, so it'd be inelastic, okay? So that's inelastic demand. Elastic demand I'm gonna go through quicker because it's just the opposite. This is, we are very responsive to a price change, okay? So the curve is going to be relatively flat, showing that there's a greater change on the x-axis than the y-axis. Examples are soda, boats, beef, real estate, pizza, and gold. So your characteristics, many substitutes. So the price goes up, you're like, well, screw that, I'll go buy something different. Luxuries, if it's a luxury rather than a necessity, then you're not going to go out and buy it if the price goes way up, right? The price goes way up, and I don't really need it anyways. And so if it's a luxury, it's going to be more elastic. If it's a large portion of your income, so go back to the, what I said, if something goes from $2 to $4, that's 100% increase in the price, but whatever, it's not that big of a deal in terms of your overall world. Well, if a car goes from $30,000 to $60,000, it's still a 100% increase, just like $2 to $4, but that makes a lot bigger difference in your overall, with your overall income. So the bigger the portion of your income, everything else equal, the more elastic the good is going to be. If you have plenty of time to decide, that means that the demand's going to be more elastic as well. This is why airline tickets are cheaper if you buy them a year in advance, right? Because airlines know, these airline companies know that, if you're buying something a year in advance, it's probably not for business, it's not for a funeral, it's not for anything super urgent. And so if they're going to sell you a ticket a year in advance, they can't charge you a really high price for that ticket, or you'll say, well, maybe I'll go somewhere different or stay closer to home, or I'll wait till the price adjusts, or I'll figure out a different way to get there, I'll drive or whatever. So the longer you have to decide, the more elastic you are as well. And then lastly, an elasticity coefficient greater than 1, which means that there's a greater change in the quantity than the change in price. So the price changes by 5% and we change our purchasing by 50%. That has a coefficient of 10. So again, it's the percent change in quantity over the percent change in price. Okay, so that's elastic and inelastic. All right. Yeah, so if you're gonna, if they give you numbers, you just do new minus old overall to find percent change, right? So if the price goes from 40 to 50, new minus old over old to be 10 over 40, so that's a 25% change in the price, right? If the quantity falls from 12 to 18, to 12 from 18, so your new is 12. So new minus old over old would be 6 over 18 or 33%. Okay, so new minus old over old, just like with like GDP and inflation, you need to be able to do percent change. Okay, is that all? I think that's it. The last thing, I guess, would be knowing the total revenue test, right? So the total revenue test is if you raise the price, if the price goes up and the total revenue changes in the same direction, that means that it is inelastic. And if you forget this, the easy way to think about it is thinking about insulin, right? Insulin is super, super inelastic. If the price of insulin doubles, you don't have diabetics saying, oh, screw that, I'm not going to buy insulin anymore because the price is too high. They would literally die. So they're going to keep buying insulin. So if the price of insulin doubles, the revenue is going to double as well, probably, right? And so that's how you can think about that, that if the price and total revenue change in the same direction, that indicates that the good is inelastic. And if they change in opposite directions, that means the price goes up and nobody buys it anymore. And so the revenue is going to fall. So if they go in opposite directions, it's elastic, same direction is inelastic. Cool. And if the price changes and the total revenue doesn't change, that means that it's unit elastic. That means that the change in quantity completely offset the change in the price. Okay. So that's it with elasticity of demand. The next thing I want to look at is elasticity of supply. And then once we do elasticity of supply, we'll look at the other two types of elasticity: income elasticity and cross-price elasticity. And then we'll look at consumer-produced surplus, deadweight loss, floors and ceilings, international trade. I'm going to try and get done with this by like 10 till. And if we need to do a little bit of it on Tuesday, we will. Okay, so price elasticity of supply. Generally speaking, most goods have inelastic supply, and so you have to think about how producers are responding to a change in price. The reason why most goods exhibit inelastic supply is it takes a little while for producers to adjust, right? So if you're selling hats, and the demand for hats suddenly jumps through the roof for some reason, and people are willing to pay a lot more for hats, you can't just have more hats. You have to produce them, right? And so in the short run, the supply is going to be relatively inelastic because it takes a little while to actually engage in the production process, right? That's pretty much it with the elasticity of supply. Is in the short run, it's going to be inelastic, but the longer firms have to adjust, the more elastic it's going to become. That's pretty much it. Okay. All right, let's go to the next two. We have elasticity we have cross-price elasticity and income elasticity. So looking at cross-price elasticity, this is looking at when you have two different goods. If you have two different goods, how does a change in the price of one good impact the quantity demanded of the other good? Okay, and so how sensitive are we to a price change in, if we're looking at cereal and milk? If the price of milk goes up and we buy less cereal, that means that these two goods must be purchased in conjunction with one another, right? And so if you get a negative, the two goods are complements. If you get a positive, the two goods are substitutes. So let's look at that. If we have milk, orange juice, and Oreos, let's say that the price of milk goes up by 20%. That means that fewer people will buy milk. If, as a result, more people buy orange juice, then it would be said that these two goods, milk and orange juice, must be substitutes, right? So you would have the percent, it's the same as elasticity of demand. Percent change in quantity over the percent change in price, but it's the percent change in the quantity of good A when there's a change in the price of good B. So here you would have 40 over 20, and the greater than 1, less than 1 is not much relevant with cross-price elasticity. With cross-price elasticity, what's relevant is positive or negative, okay? So here you would have a positive. You would have, if the price of milk goes up, the quantity of orange juice demanded goes up as well, so that's a positive. It's a positive over positive, which indicates that the two goods are substitute goods. If you look at Oreos, if the price of milk goes up 20% and people buy less Oreos, that means that they must be purchasing milk and Oreos together, right? So they are complementary goods. So again, if you get a positive relationship, that means the goods are substitutes. If you get a negative relationship, it implies that the goods are complementary goods which are purchased together. Okay, so that's your cross-price elasticity. The next one is income elasticity. So income elasticity is going to show you whether a good is a normal good, a good that you want, that you like, and as your income goes up, you buy more of it, or if the good is a crappy, inferior good that you don't want, right? Where your income goes up and you stop buying it, okay? So this is the percent change in quantity when there's a change in income, okay? So if your income goes up, if your income goes up 30% and as a result you stop buying this thing, that means it's a thing that you don't like. And now that your income goes up, you don't have to buy it anymore, right? So if there's a negative relationship here, your income goes up and you buy less of this thing, that shows that this good is an inferior good. It's an inferior good. So ramen noodles, used clothing, stuff like that, okay? So as your income goes up, you buy less of that thing. It's an inferior good. And the reverse would be your income goes up and you buy more of this thing. If that's the case, that's a positive relationship. And if it's a positive relationship, it's considered a normal good, okay? Alyssa, anything to add?
No.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's income elasticity. The main thing with that is just be careful here. If it says something about a negative or a positive relationship, make sure that you are paying attention to if they're asking about cross-price elasticity or income elasticity, okay? So that's it with elasticities. If you look at, so 2.6, we're going to look at consumer and producer surplus. So consumer and producer surplus is the difference between so consumer surplus is the difference between what we're willing to pay for something and what we actually pay for it. Okay, what we're willing to pay and what we actually pay. So if you're willing to pay, there are some people, this is milk, I think, doesn't matter. Let's say this is milk. There's some people who'd be willing to pay $5 for milk, okay, according to the table. At $5, 10 people are willing to buy milk, or there are 10 units demanded. So if the price is only $3, that means for these people who are willing to spend $5, they would have a consumer surplus of $2. The people who are willing to pay $4 would have a consumer surplus of $1. Willing to pay $3.05, they have a 5-cent surplus. Willing to pay $2.50, they have no surplus. They don't buy this thing because they were only willing to pay $2.50 and it costs $3. Okay, so your consumer surplus is the gap between what you're willing to pay and what you pay. Okay, and then your producer surplus is the same thing, but from a supplier's perspective. So according to your supply schedule, at $1, there are the quantity that firms are willing to supply is 10. Well, they're not selling it for $1. They're selling it for the equilibrium price of $3, right? And so at $1, or at $3 rather, the firms who are willing to sell it for $1 have a $2 producer surplus. If they're able to sell it at $3 and they're willing to accept $2, they have a $1 surplus. If they're only willing to accept $4, they have no producer surplus because the price is $3. They don't sell that thing, right? So that's your consumer producer surplus. You might need to know, and I don't know how what the test is going to look like in May. I really don't, but I know you're not going to have to draw a graph. Maybe they'll have a graph drawn for you and you'll have to analyze the graph. I don't really know. If that's the case, remember that your consumer surplus is the area of this triangle up here. The gap between what you're willing to pay and what you pay, okay, times the quantity. So it would be your base times height divided by 2. And down here, same thing with your producer surplus, your base times height divided by 2. And when you do your height, make sure you don't say, oh, well, it's 3, so it's 3. Well, no, if the bottom of your triangle is at 1, then your height here would be 3 minus 1, okay? So be careful on that. Okay, if the price is currently $4, we're clearly in disequilibrium here, right? If the price is $4, according to your demand and supply schedules, we have a quantity supplied, which is greater than the quantity demanded, meaning we're in disequilibrium. We have a surplus of 20 units here. So the way firms will get rid of this surplus is by offering these goods at a lower and lower price. And as the price falls, more and more consumers want this good, and fewer producers are willing to be able to sell the good until we equilibrate at $3. Okay, but if we are in disequilibrium, then that's what's going to happen is the quantity supply and quantity demanded will start to change until we eventually equilibrate, right? So that's what's called the invisible hand of the market is pushing the price down towards equilibrium if we're in disequilibrium. Okay, same thing if we're in disequilibrium below. Okay, if the price is set at $2, that means that the quantity demanded here is greater than the quantity supplied. And so the way the market would naturally equilibrate is consumers would start bidding against each other for these goods. And as the price rises, it prices some consumers out of the market, and it encourages producers to produce more. And so we move up along the supply curve and along the demand curve until we equilibrate back at the $3. okay? Got it. Okay, yeah, so there's your consumer surplus and producer surplus. Again, it's possible that they have this drawn for you in May and they just ask you to analyze it. If that's the case, it's very simple. It's just base times height over 2. So if you're calculating the consumer surplus, your base is 30, your height is 15, right? So it's 30 times 15, which is 450. 450 divided by 2 is 225, so that'd be your consumer surplus. Producer surplus, your base is 30. Your height is 10, so it's 300 divided by 2, so 150 would be your producer surplus. Cool? So that's how we calculate that. So let's look at floors and ceilings. Okay, so when we look at floors and ceilings, and this is kind of interesting in over the past month or so, as there have been shortages of toilet paper and shortages of hand sanitizer, and there's been so much talk of price gouging laws and trying to protect consumers from predatory producers. And at the end of the day, with most things in economics, most things in life, it's complicated. And life is about trade-offs, and these price gouging laws are about trade-offs as well. And so what we know, which is basic economics, is that price controls will result in shortages or surpluses, okay? And so if there's a price ceiling set on gasoline, just looking at the economics of it, if the price of gasoline is $4 and the government says, in order to prevent these evil gas companies from charging too much for gasoline, we're gonna cap that price at $2. So if they cap it at $2, the result is, it seems like a good thing on paper. And so the idea is we want more gasoline at a lower price. They're willing and able to sell us less. And so the result is we're now in disequilibrium. We were buying 30 and they were supplying us 30. And now they're only supplying us 20 and we want 50. So we have a shortage of 30. So the way the market would naturally equilibrate is consumers would start bidding up the price. And as that happens, these firms would be willing and able to sell more and more gasoline. And so you would have an increase in the quantity supplied and a decrease in the demand until we equilibrate closer to $4, okay? But as it is, if this is a legally binding ceiling, which it is if it's set below, that means that these firms cannot legally raise their price. And so what you're gonna have is you're gonna have, like we saw with toilet paper and hand sanitizer, you're gonna see people hoarding it. You're gonna see people hoarding it, you're gonna see black markets pop up, and the inefficiency that you can see graphically is shown by your deadweight loss, which we'll look at in a second. So a price floor would be the opposite, right? So this is after the Industrial Revolution, whenever the price of corn and other agriculture products collapsed because everybody has tractors now, and so it increased their yields dramatically, which collapsed the price. And so the price is super low and they owe all this money for all their new tractors. And so they ask for some price controls to try and help. So a price floor, for it to be binding, has to be set above equilibrium. It's designed to help producers. The result is the price goes up, we don't want as much. And now that they're guaranteed a higher price because the government's going to subsidize it, probably they have an incentive to produce more. And the result is we have a perpetual surplus, which producers can't get rid of, right? So they can't get rid of it for lower than $4, and at $4 we only want 20 units of corn, and so we have this surplus that producers can't get rid of. Okay, so they've got to burn their crop, or they have to build silos and just store it all in there, or the government will buy it from them, or whatever. Okay, and so your consumer surplus would be up here, producer surplus would be this trapezoid, and your deadweight loss would be this triangle. So here's what it looks like without any sort of price controls. Your consumer surplus is up here, producer surplus is down here. If we have a price, what is that, a ceiling or floor? It's a ceiling, right? It is a binding price ceiling. The result is we want more because the price is lower. They don't want to sell us as much because the price is too low, and as a result, we're in disequilibrium. So the consumer surplus, does it go up or down? We don't really know. We certainly have a decrease in how much we're buying, but those who are still able to buy it have a bigger surplus, okay? And so there's an increase in consumer surplus for the people who are still able to buy it, but for people who can't buy it anymore, their surplus falls to zero because they can't buy it anymore, okay? Your producer surplus definitely is squeezed by this. And the reason why is they're not able to sell it for as much as they were in the first place, okay? And you can see that we have, so before the intervention, your total surplus was the blue and green. After the surplus, your total is that blue and green. And so the lost surplus as a result of the price control is your inefficiency in the market, which we call deadweight loss, okay? So when it comes to price floors, that's a binding price floor. You see something similar happening, but opposite. Okay, when that price goes up, it squeezes our consumer surplus. We don't want as much, and those who are able to buy it are paying a higher price. For producers, some are better off, those who are still able to sell it to us, but some are worse off because there just isn't as much, the quantity demanded has fallen to the point to where they're not able to sell as much as they were before. Okay, and so we have, again, we have that inefficiency in market called a deadweight loss. Okay, so what happens naturally whenever, so what happened, a month ago, whenever there was so much uncertainty with the coronavirus and nobody had any idea what was going on, why did people go out and buy a lot more toilet paper? Like, you're not going to the bathroom more just because there's a coronavirus going on, but it's people freak out and people go out and they hoard resources. That's what happens, right? So we saw, you see somebody walking in with a big pallet of toilet paper or a big pallet of hand sanitizer, and you have people coming and just loading up their cart and literally carrying as much as they can to the cash register. Well, if you allow the price to go up, you have a couple of things happening. So those price signals are conveying information to people, right? So when you allow prices to go up, it tells consumers to buy less, not out of the kindness of their heart, but because the price has gone up. And so they're not going to buy as much toilet paper if the price goes up. And so it prevents hoarding if you allow the price to go up. It also incentivizes producers to produce more if you allow the price to go up as well. And so it seems paradoxical, but the way that you can ensure the price of these things will not skyrocket is by allowing the price to go up. Okay, so again, it seems like a paradox, but the best way to keep the price of these things reasonable is to allow them to go up. And when you allow them to go up, the result is people want less and firms have an incentive to produce more. And so you have an increase in the supply and a decrease in the quantity demanded, which helps to stabilize that price and helps to ensure that we will never be out of those necessities and out of toilet paper and hand sanitizer. But when the government intervenes, the result is what we've seen, which is that you're going to have shortages. It's no different with price controls with apartments. It's good for some people. It's good for the people who are in those apartments, but it's bad for literally everybody else. And it's especially bad for lower income people who can't afford rent in some of these places. But if you allow the rent and prices to adjust, so with rent specifically, you allow it to adjust upward, it incentivizes builders to come in and build more of these apartments. And when that happens, there's a greater supply and that lowers the price. And so you don't need the government to say, we want that price to be lower, so the price is lower. Rather, you allow the prices to adjust and incentivizes more producers to come in and produce more. And that is what lowers the price and keeps it reasonable. But you do need to know graphically how that looks. And you need to know the graphical representation of the inefficiency is that deadweight loss, okay? So again, maybe they'll have this graph drawn for you and they'll ask you to analyze it. If they do, that says when the market's in equilibrium, what's the total economic surplus? Well, your consumer surplus is FGH, your producer surplus is IJK, okay? If the government intervenes in this market and sets a price ceiling at P1, that means that the producer surplus is now only K. The consumer surplus is now F, G, and I. And there are no more transactions beyond this point. We want more because the price is low, but we can't get any more because firms are unwilling to supply as much or anything beyond that point. And so H and J are lost surplus due to the intervention. And so that's your deadweight loss. Hopefully you all remember this from when we talked about it. It's obviously super relevant right now with what's going on. There's just a lot of, I don't know, it goes back to unintended consequences and the fact that something that looks good on paper and seems like a good idea often results in making the problem worse. And like you feel like you're helping, but the result is you make things worse. It's like whenever you have poaching laws, what's the result? Well, people who are going to poach are going to poach, and they have even more incentive to go poach now because it drives the price up of rhino horns or whatever. Same thing with like weed. When weed is illegal, well, it incentivizes producers to sell weed because they can make a lot of money doing it. And what you see happening is when weed is legal, it drives the price of weed down, and it takes away the incentive of those people to sell weed on the black market. And so if you allow prices to adjust, the result is we don't have shortages, we don't have surpluses. Okay. So following a prolonged power outage, and this is exactly what we're talking about here, the price of flashlights normally goes up, or you could substitute power outage with coronavirus and flashlights with hand sanitizer. And it says if cities that pass laws prohibiting price increases for hand sanitizer during coronavirus, such laws would most likely do what? It would result in a shortage. Okay. So again, maybe this is how the free response will look. I don't really know, but this says calculate the total producer surplus of the market equilibrium. Producer surplus is this triangle down here. So it's your base of 20 times your height of 20. So 400 divided by 2 is going to be 200. So that's your producer surplus, right? And so you need to be able to do that kind of math. They did tell us yesterday that you can use a calculator on the AP test. And so you don't have to like be real secretive about it. You can use a calculator. So maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. That just means that they can ask you more complicated math type questions. So I don't know, but you can use a calculator. So that's maybe welcome news for some of you. Okay, when it comes to excise tax, we're going to talk, let's see, it's 10:48. So real quick, let's talk excise taxes. You know what? Let's talk excise taxes real quick. Let's not. I'm going to, what I'll do is this. I will record a video on excise taxes and on world trade. I think this is kind of a natural break, a natural time to stop. And so what I'll do is I'll record a video on excise taxes and on world trade. So if you remember, excise tax looks like this, right? So you have looks like this. And so you have the supply before the tax, you have the demand, and so your equilibrium price is 2, the equilibrium quantity is Q2. After the imposition of the tax, and this has the feel of a negative externality, right? This is how you decrease in the consumption of a good which carries a negative externality. So you put it on a per unit tax. And so when you put this per unit tax in place, it shifts the supply to the left, which raises the price. But the important thing to remember here is it raises the price that consumers pay, and it lowers the price which producers get to keep. And so the vertical distance is the amount of the tax. P3 is what we pay. P1 is what producers get to keep. And so your consumer surplus up here, producer surplus down here, your deadweight loss is D and E, and then the tax revenue generated by the tax is BCHF. Consumers are essentially paying BC for the tax, and producers are paying H and F. So hopefully that you kind of remember that. But I'll post a video covering that and also covering the world trade. So if you remember this crazy looking thing where there's just a ton of stuff going on here. And so we have, again, with closed borders, H is consumer surplus, ILT is producer surplus. With world trade, it collapses the price to PW. And so if this is your domestic supply at a price of PW, domestically producers are only willing to supply Q1. But at that lower price, we want Q5. And so where are we going to get Q5 minus Q1? We're going to import it from other countries. We can see that crushes our domestic producers. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. Again, like everything else, it's trade-offs. It's some good, some bad. If our government thinks that, well, let's try and help those producers, let's put a tariff in place, the result is we don't want as much. And so the quantity demanded goes from Q5 to Q4. Domestically, they were willing to supply Q1. Now they're willing to supply Q2. And so now we're only importing Q4 minus Q2, okay? So hopefully that you kind of remember that with world trade, our consumer surplus is HIJK, LMNRS, and T is producer surplus. With the tariff, our consumer surplus is now only HIJK, producer surplus is only L&T. N and R would be the tax revenue generated by the tariff, which is the amount that we import Q4 minus Q2 times the amount of the tariff, which is the price with the tariff minus the price without the tariff. And so N and R is the tax revenue. M and S would be our deadweight loss. So it's kind of hidden in there a little bit. It's not as clear as usual. So I'll release a video going over tariffs and world trade, and I'll send that to you probably on Saturday, a link to that video, along with the link to the answers to Unit 2 multiple choice and free response. And then on Tuesday next week, we'll jump into Unit 3 micro, which is perfect competition in the product market. And then Thursday we'll do monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. And then the following week we will do Unit 5, which is the resource market. And I don't think you're going to be tested over externalities. I'll go back and look this weekend to make sure. But next week we'll hit kind of the main part of micro, which is the product market, and then we'll finish it off the week after that. Hey, have a great day. Don't touch anyone today, especially don't touch any old people or cough in their face or anything like that. Be safe. If I can do anything for you, don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. I'll talk to you guys later.